co-housing, no, we did not look at it. And in terms of looking at specific parcels, not the rec center, and overall, looking at the former hospital site was the only one that was considered. And even then, not so much specifically in terms of what exactly could be built, but the fact that here was a large parcel of land that was potentially coming up with redevelopment opportunity.
On behalf of Seth Jeevan, I thank you for that. Okay. And now my questions. My name is Bern Kelly. I am a landlord, property owner, and a planner and an architect, landscape architect. I'm very much in favor of the accessory dwelling unit autonomy by the city, gaining autonomy. The 500-foot rule has been a problem, and I live on a Circle Avenue. We have 6 houses, and we have about 12 units. And we were in Prince George's County, and it got annexed and came into the city. So we're an anomaly. I could tell you it's a model for having this. But I do think that I would recommend, did the mic go down, that we have a way that the city is not burdened by the additional costs of these additional units, such as over a garage or something, as you mentioned, by having a tiered property tax system, so that if it's accessory unit within the house, then it's still what it was for property tax. But if we add a little tiny house or an accessory building, then perhaps there should be a tier of property tax to help cover all the services that would be the city would be burdened by. So that's a suggestion. And then I'm very much in favor of the land trust model, and as Seth Jeevan pointed out, we have several big properties, including possibly the Seventh-day Adventist School up on Carroll, as well as the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital. I understand the Seventh-day Adventists have mission requirements, and they could very well want to partner in affordable housing, and they might make the college be a model for demonstration. So I think that is not as far-fetched a reach as you said it might be. I would be very happy to act as an ambassador and talk to all of my employees are Seventh-day Adventists, by the way. And then I see a need for this is a much bigger picture in the municipal system. I see a need for a credit union, a homegrown credit union or a homegrown bank. I see it at the Takoma Junction site in that building, right below the affordable housing above it. And I would like to see us think about how to land a bank and bankers and not have the city become the bank and burden them with all of these financial things you talked about, but actually have a bank that is working on behalf of the city, the residents, the people who live here, and keeping the money local and recycling it. So those are my ideas and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman?
Thank you. Mark Sherman. I live at the Carroll Gardens apartment complex, which is 1 block from here. 67 units, post-war garden-style building, using old-fashioned ways of heating and cooling. I don't have window units in my building. I use ceiling fans. I open the windows. I use the shades. We have trees. We have grass. We have setback. It's a very different style building, and one of my concerns is that a distinction to be made between those what I would call historic structures and a new structure which may rely upon central air and have none of the old-time features that we enjoy, including genuine hardwood floors, real plaster walls, and so on. More largely, I wanted to speak to the idea of revising the rent control ordinance and echo the concerns of Councilmember Siemens. To the extent that our property is not well maintained, I don't think it's for lack of funds on the part of the owner. That's an accountability issue. Merely giving the owners more money, there's no guarantee that that will translate into a greater investment in the property. And besides, the owner's idea of improving the property may not be our idea of improving the property. The owner may install things that, as far as we were concerned, were just fine the way they were, and end up leaving the property less desirable as far as we're concerned. So the word improvement is a sort of dangerous word. One man's improvement is another man's, you just ruined something that was really nice. I do want to echo the idea of community land trusts, because my vision is that an apartment complex like ours could become owned by the residents, but not necessarily for each of us to become rich over owning our own little unit. And there was, in another city where I lived, Milwaukee, something called the West Side Housing Co-op. I just Googled it and found that it failed, but the idea behind it was a nice one. To take ownership of many units in a community and own those collectively so that you rented from the co-op. You didn't own your unit, but your landlord was you and your fellow members of the cooperative. It was a more intimate relationship and a less feudal one than the one we have now. So my desire is for ways for tenants to proactively move into that kind of a relationship, ownership situation, instead of waiting for the property to go on the market, because our landlord may never put the property on the market. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Person who comes here often and speaks to the council, but anyway, I'm in Ward 5. Mr. Smith, Councilman Smith is my representative. I'm Joan Van Blake, and I'm a landlord. Having said that, I live in a single-family house, which is one dwelling, one additional, one rental. So that takes me, out from under the rent stabilization. If I were to rent my upstairs, then I would be under rent stabilization. And I think a lot of the comments tonight that had to do with affordable housing and the period of time in which you maintain affordable housing, I think really speaks to some of the larger buildings, because you're really talking Section 8. You're talking, HUD requirements and so forth. But there are a lot of units in Takoma Park which are small owners, like myself, a lot of 4s, a lot of 6s, and so forth. And with regard to the concept of code enforcement, it's my understanding that right now Montgomery County does the code enforcement for us. And so if we were to change that, or maybe you could, whatever, that would require Takoma Park to take it over. Mm-hmm. But it's my understanding, when I've been inspected, if it's not appropriately, they come back to double checks. But I guess in these larger units, it's a bigger problem. With regard to vacant property, is this a list which is available to the public? If I, as an investor, wanted to approach those owners without having to drive all around town and find out where they are? I think in Montgomery County, the condemned properties are, is it online? Mm-hmm. But if I were to approach you, I could get that list?
It's public information, and you can contact us about that.
Okay, all right. With regard to possible rent-based income, which said it would result in a mixed income building, it's already a mixed income building. If you've got people who have high incomes and low incomes, and they're all paying the same rent, that's a mixed income building. So you're not really going to, I think, accomplish any more. What you're going to have is some people are going to pay more rent, and others, the same. With regard to the the community land trust, it sounded like this would almost be like a land lease program, which they have in Baltimore City now, mm-hmm. where you lease the land forever, but you own the house. So I don't know if that's really what, the intention was. But I do agree with the comment that the fact that you give the landlord some sort of incentive doesn't necessarily guarantee that he is going to, improve the property, unless it's somehow built into the program that he's getting this increase in order to be able to do that, and there's some way to back it up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening.
Hi, my name's Alex Mendelson. I grew up in Ward 1, mm-hmm. And still live here on Philadelphia Avenue mm-hmm. now, renting. And I'm also, I think it's worth mentioning, given the, testimony today, that I'm a licensed realtor in Maryland. I also do a few other things, including volunteering as a housing community development specialist with CHEER. I'm here up at the mic to talk a little bit about community land trust strategy specifically, since I incorporated one in 2016, and spoken with people up and down the East Coast about it, including the executive directors of many of them, who are very interested in seeing one work here. Also, big partners like Enterprise, who recently piloted one in supporting one in a collection of them actually in New York City, are interested in seeing one work here. There are a couple that are getting off the ground in DC, specifically in Southeast, that City First Bank is helping out with. And I would encourage the city to get in touch with City First about soft seconds and about how to use a mortgage as an instrument to increase and preserve affordability. I'd also encourage a change to the draft, specifically in that section about community land trusts, to broaden the definition a little bit. It's not just a land lease program. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, ma'am. But the general idea behind them is that with a subsidy, the new homeowner agrees to participate in preserving permanent affordability. And that doesn't just have to come with a land purchase. To speak to Councilmember Smith's point, if you're going to purchase land outright in Montgomery County, it's going to be very hard to get anything like that off the ground. Mm-hmm. So that's just to say that in the lease agreement, rather you can have a resale agreement which restricts appreciation beyond a certain amount in return for a subsidy to enable a first-time home buyer or a low-income person to purchase a condo or a home. So the model is very flexible, and there are national experts who can help you with that. Burlington Associates is generally recognized as the national expert in that, and if you look at Champlain Housing Trust, to this question of who's done it right, that's I think the shining example of an affordable housing organization. It's getahome.org, and they have 2,500 units under permanent affordability, more all the time throughout the year, and it's headquartered in Burlington, so the largest city in Vermont. So the solutions are out there, I would also say that community land trust model, since Takoma Park, it's in the 2018 fiscal year budget, that home values are going to continue to appreciate here, so you're expecting more property tax revenue from that. I would also say that as development continues, as Takoma Park becomes a more and more desirable community, because it's walkable, for a number of other reasons, then a community land trust would encourage that preservation aspect. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to first echo some of the concerns that a few people have had about making the rent stabilization connected to income. Mm-hmm. I know for myself and a lot of other people, there's a gap between being rich enough to be able to afford a nice apartment and poor enough to be able to afford to be able to qualify for certain low-income programs, and I'm in that gap for a lot of things, and I'm glad I'm not qualifying for a lot of programs in many ways, but that was what came to my mind initially. And related to that, I recently moved, and while I was searching, I learned about MPDUs, moderately priced dwelling units in Montgomery County, and I learned that and I might be wrong about this, but that there aren't any in Takoma Park. And so I was doing some research in Silver Spring, and I wonder if anyone has any insight as to why that is. And then this may be a question for offline, because this may be too specific to me, but, and so if someone wanted to answer it afterwards, I don't want to waste any time, but I live in I think what's called the Between the Creeks neighborhood of Takoma Park, which means that my street address is Takoma Park, but for purposes of taxes and voting and things like that, I'm technically Silver Spring. And it's an area that is almost completely all garden-style apartments. And so I have I think it's a sort of a unique area, and it's also a high percentage of residents of people of color. And so I have a few questions that maybe I could ask afterwards. I'm not sure exactly where the jurisdiction is in terms of how your plan would apply to my neighborhood, but I may be the only one, so I don't want to waste any time with that.
Right.
So,
Talk to her.
thanks.
Yeah. Ms. Daines, do you want to answer the question on the?
The question was, how come there aren't any MPDU units in Takoma Park? Correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, but I believe the program is focused purely on new construction, and as was commented on in Marjorie's earlier presentation, there has been no new construction of multifamily housing in Takoma Park for 50 years, maybe?
Yeah. And there's only been a few single-family permits issued over either a 12 or 15-year period.
Yeah.
Great.
Am I next?
You're next.
Am I next? I'm going to turn this over to Mary Jane because she's disabled and cannot stand for very long temporarily here.
Thank you.
And then I'll take my turn.
Oh, that's sweet of you, Fred. Anyways, hi. This is Mary Jane Matui, Ward 2. I'm just concerned that no one mentioned special needs people when you were talking about people you're trying to help, because we encompass people of every race, nationality, sexual orientation, but yet you did, and we are the poorest, by the way. People are permanently disabled, economically the poorest group ever, okay, no matter where you go. And second of all, I'm concerned about the gentrification, especially in my neighborhood, and the Black Americans have been here from North Carolina for like 40, 50 years. They're moving out. It's becoming more white, upper middle class, because you have to be rich to afford houses. In our neighborhood, the two of them across the street went for, I think, $690,000 a piece. And, you know, and they weren't that big. I mean, they were nice, but yeah, $690,000. And they weren't even, the yards weren't even that big, which I like, big yards. But anyways, and I read in Black Enterprise magazine that Black Americans of all groups have their highest amount of money is invested in their homes. So if you don't have homes, home buyers are Black Americans, then they're worse off than any other group except for maybe Native Americans as a race. And I think they should be credited, I mean, and take this in consideration, that are becoming more and more upper or wealthier white. And not that wealthier white people aren't bad, it's just that I like the mixture that I moved into. I moved there like 32 years ago with my biracial family, and I feel much more comfortable. I moved there because of that, because of the class and racial mixture there. And it's changing, and I don't feel like we belong in our neighborhood anymore. And I just want to keep it. And I've had two good friends move to Hyattsville, because that's a new place now that people who can't afford Takoma Park are moving to Hyattsville, and I guess a lot of you all know that already. And it's sad to see my friends move. Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
I didn't know if anybody wanted to respond, so assuming not. A couple thoughts or random thoughts here. I would like to suggest to my city council colleagues that all that we really need to learn about how to accomplish what we want to accomplish here in terms of affordability has already been accomplished elsewhere in the United States by different municipalities and different developers. And I would have hoped that our consultants here would have been able to come up with a long list of those kinds of cities and projects across the United States. For example, Enterprise Development Partners, which is based in Columbia, is one of those entities. Another resource which I want to share here is the National Building Museum has got an exhibition opened last November and runs through September it's called the Making Room, Housing for a Changing America. My wife and I saw it a couple months ago, and what it basically does is it addresses, they have a model house built into the museum of showing how a particular unit with the use of movable walls can be changed by the owners, by the occupants or the owners of the property, by moving walls. And this is space that is completely modern, high-tech, using the latest stuff, but some things that you would see that you didn't even know had been invented yet, in order to make units flexible. And when I saw this exhibit, which is free, by the way, since it's part of the National Smithsonian, is that when we talk about affordable housing, we know what our inventory is, and most of it's older buildings, like at least going back to the 1970s. And it's hard for us, including myself, to envision how do you change what we have, the actual existing inventory, physically, to actually make it more affordable so that the space is being used more efficiently. And people can live in smaller and smaller units but have all the comforts and the efficiencies that they need, but because it's smaller and it's more efficient, it becomes more affordable. You don't have to tear buildings down in order to do that. You just modify them from the inside out. I have this, this is the brochure from that exhibit, and I would encourage all of the members of the City Council and anybody else to go down to the National Building Museum and look at this, because one of the most interesting aspects is not just the physical exhibit. This is what it looks like. Is that there are a number of development projects that have been built in the United States, including co-housing and all kinds of ADU situations across the United States, some near and some far, that have actually been built. Actual developers have done these, and they have displays of this. And one of the developers is quoted as, who's done maybe 8 or 10 different developments across the United States, basically is quoted as saying that every project I ever built was illegal when I started. Because so basically the problem is we have in Montgomery County, we have so many restrictions against ADUs that it's almost impossible without changing the county zoning ordinance to be able to think constructively and creatively about how ADUs work. So that's a big, long row to hoe, but I think it's where we have to start. I would also like to add that I think landlords are not adequately represented in this discussion. I've just had a couple who preceded me who know what it's like, because I'm afraid that there's a false assumption that somehow or another landlord, I mean, we know that there's slumlords in this city. There's no question that the slumlords are out to milk every dollar they can until the building collapses, practically. But most of them are not in that way. And I think when we talk about we're getting the cart in front of the horse, we think, well, we'll give them money and then we'll hope that they'll make the improvements. What needs to be done is to figure out what the improvements need, that we tell them, or the tenants tell them what needs to be done. And then we figure out a way to get them the money to make those improvements. And I think that's a way that, because landlords are struggling with the rent stabilization ordinance, and if you talk to enough of them, you'll realize that as good as an ordinance as it is, it's not exactly the most helpful thing in the world for landlords who really are, from their point of view, they are small business owners. And they happen to own real estate, and that happens to be their business. And the last thing I'd just comment is I think one of the sources of money to help to do this comes not just from important banks, but also from major corporations that are involved in the building trades. And I think those major corporations can be invited to come in and help work with the city and some of the nonprofit organizations like MHP to figure out how these projects can be modified for which they would be known as sponsors of this, when they would get that publicity, and they would be able to facilitate a lot of the cash that's needed in order to get projects redeveloped in an efficient sort of way. I mean, we tend to be a very progressive city. We tend to think that anything that has to do with corporate America is, you know, we need to shy away from it because big is bad. But a lot of times these big major corporations have the wherewithal to come up with very large sums of money that will in turn benefit them as a corporation from the standpoint of not just CRA regulations, but from their image and really their effectiveness, because a good quality project is a way for those corporations to prove to the public that they are as good as they say they are. So those are just some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harris?
Good afternoon. My name is Artie Harris, and I wear two hats tonight. I live in Takoma Park on Sycamore Avenue. I've lived there for 20 years with my wife and my two daughters, and I work for Montgomery Housing Partnership, a private nonprofit that develops affordable housing in the county. So a couple things, and thank you for this forum. I hope the start of many discussions about creating more housing and affordable housing. One of the, I wanted to say, for small landlords, you know, 2 to maybe 20 unit properties, the county is starting again this apartment assistance program. And they had it, I don't know, maybe they stopped it about 5-7 years ago, but the premise of that is to work with smaller landlords to talk about, they had programs to help some of the landlords learn better about programs that the county had, or how property improvements that would bring in trade organizations in, either through HVAC consultants or energy efficiency consultants or window consultants, and provide the services to landlords so that they can understand better some of the services out there. And then the county also was providing some small, low-cost loans, and they're going to start that program again within the next month. So that something could be good for the smaller landlords. Also, I believe that I've seen around the county that many of the apartments, especially in Takoma Park and all around the county, many of these buildings were built in the 50s and 40s, and there is going to be a major problem with these older buildings, and it's not just the, you know, the cabinets and the flooring, it's all what's behind the wall. So I think that maybe to get ahead of that is maybe to do some inventory, but it is going to be a major problem. It's not just the small stuff, it's the big stuff. So I think that we, as owners, as the city, needs to we do some surveying, seeing how big the problem is, and let's work on it in a global scale. The other piece is newer housing stock. I think with, I'm encouraging with, trying to understand, incentivize the larger developers to develop newer units, and that's how you get those MPDUs. The standard is 12.5% of all new developments have to have moderately priced dwelling units. In some communities like Bethesda, when they redid the sector plan in certain parts, they upped it to 15%. So maybe there are some ways that we really could look at the land use in Takoma Park to help incentivize upzone as much as possible. I don't know, I can't remember what the zoning of all the land use in Takoma Park, but I think we should look strategically as a community and with park and planning to where are the right places to develop, upzone those properties, create market rate, which will also create, you know, 15 whatever % we want to do is at that. So those are some of the things I think, because this is not a short-term problem, it's a long-term problem. And in terms of rent stabilization, you know, we need to do the homework. Is that program causing some of the landlords not to invest? Because, to be perfectly honest, you know, you won't reinvest unless you have some return. And lenders go to you to borrow money, they want to see how are you going to repay that money. And so maybe all landlords won't reinvest, but in their properties, but that's generally the way you go and borrow money is they say, how can you repay it? And generally they look at your net operating income, which is your revenue minus expenses, and then they'll factor that and say, this is how much we'll loan you. So I think that we should look at all of those pieces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Hi, I'm Chuck. I've lived in Takoma Park for more than 20 years. I started as a renter, and for a while I was an owner and rented out some space in my house, and now I'm a renter again. So I've had a lot of different perspectives. My first question is when people went online to submit feedback on your report, who were the recipients of that feedback? Was that you or the city staff? Who had the chance to read the feedback that was submitted?
Ms. Staines.
The information or the feedback that was provided on the online form
Yes.
went to staff. When the consultants were still in the process of preparing the draft plan, it was shared with them. And then prior to this evening, it was all forwarded to the city council members for review before tonight.
So any feedback that was submitted from late December through recently, did you have the chance to read that feedback, or was that just staff?
I don't
and
think we
council?
forwarded it to you.
Okay.
But we can do that. But it's been shared with all the city council members.
So I guess for those of you who had the chance to read it, what were some of the specific arguments that were submitted in opposition to amending the rent stabilization ordinance?
I think I can answer that.
Sure.
I think some of the questions that have been raised tonight that I think you've heard also from many of us up here on this on the city council, that Councilmember Smith said and Councilmember Seaman said, were some of the comments that were put in as well. And we can actually make those comments. Tonight was specifically to have questions for the consultants. We will be holding at least one other work session. And so when we hold that work session, actually there's two coming up. One on March 14th, where we'll have the Renters Protection group coming to discuss with the City Council, and I imagine that will be part of that discussion. We can put those comments up for that. And then on March 21st, I believe the City Council has a work session scheduled on that as well. And so we can have those comments made public for everyone to see. And I don't know if my colleagues have had a chance to look in on all those comments, but we can bring them up then.
Okay. Can you think of any downsides to the to amending rent stabilization that haven't been specifically mentioned tonight? Can you think of any, despite some good intentions, some ways that might negatively impact renters?
Are you saying, would we recommend to do away with it? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking just for a little flow of thoughts, just to brainstorm a little bit. Can you think of what might be some downsides to allowing landlords to charge higher amounts to higher income tenants? And in other words, every recommendation has pros and cons.
Sure.
And I saw the recommendations and I heard some pros. I'm sure you've given
So
it
the
a
way
lot
our
of thought. What are
recommendation-
some of the cons?
So the way
that
our
have occurred to
recommendation
you?
was stated was that for those that are making above whatever income level the city would establish, then a higher rent would be paid.
Yes.
Not to eliminate the ordinance altogether.
Right. What are some of the downsides that occur to you that could possibly result from that change?
For some folks, with higher incomes, their rent would be increased.
So the only downside would be to the people with higher incomes. You
Off
can't
the
think
top
of
of my
any
head, yes.
off the top of your head.
Mhm.
What about when two people go to interview for an apartment, and the landlord asks for proof of income so that they can charge the person who makes more, and one low-income person shows that they make $20,000 a year, and somebody else shows that they make $80,000 a year. Can you think of any downside to the lower-income person?
Sure.
Okay. What might that be?
I think you know what it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excuse me. Steve Nadell, longtime resident of Ward 2. Comment and a question. The comment is related to my professional work, where I work for a nonprofit think tank downtown working on energy efficiency. I just wanted to note what Ms. Willow had mentioned, how energy can be a major cost, and it's a very manageable cost, and we need to factor that in. For most people, mortgage or rent is their #1 cost, taxes are #2, energy is #3, but it's really something that's manageable. I know we're working with Gene Mathias on a number of different things for both multifamily and single family. You may hear about that later, but that's one part of the discussion. My question has to do with condominiums. I'm hearing a lot more discussion lately, and I don't know whether it's just, buzz or something concrete about it, about more condominiums coming into Tacoma, people condoizing. It has an advantage in that it helps give people an ownership stake. It has a disadvantage in that it takes rental property out of circulation, and it tends to result in higher income people being in. I was wondering what has been the experience and some of the best practices for helping to maximize benefits and minimize some of the harm in terms of the reduction in affordable housing if condos are becoming more common in our city.
Yeah, neither one of us have been involved with clients that have done condos, so I couldn't answer that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
My name's Wayne Sherwood, and I live on, excuse me, Grant Avenue, just behind the community center. I think it's an excellent report. You put a lot of time and thought in it, and a lot of good ideas. I'm concerned a little bit that there are so many good ideas, and our staff is relatively limited here, as our funds are relatively limited. And just say briefly that there are some really big issues facing us, and there are a lot of small things. And I'm a little concerned that we spend too much time sometimes on what you might call boutique programs that only a few people might benefit from, while something like the Purple Line is swooping down on us and could affect a lot of people in a big way. And let's keep a sense of proportion on some of these things. I think particularly I've seen studies about what happened on rapid transit or rail transit in other cities, especially, it was pointed out in Seattle, and people in Seattle, a major new high-speed rail line, people warned for years about the displacement that was going to cause. There were studies done, there were reports done, and everybody agreed that if nothing was done, there would be a lot of displacement, and it was a lot of hand-wringing, and nothing was done, and there was a lot of displacement. And I kind of see that happening in this region too. I've seen reports all over the place, reports on the Washington Post. I've seen reports on a consortium that's supposedly been put together of a lot of governments and the University of Maryland, and it's a Purple Line Consortium. And I see a lot of people talking about everyone is very concerned about this, and they're thinking about it together. And then I say, well, what is happening? I think that the city of Takoma Park can't spend a lot of money on these things, but the state of Maryland, why not? Some proposals have been made to the state to try to help small businesses that will not be displaced, but they'll stay in place, and they'll be hurt by the fact that they might be closed. Why can't we have more programs coming out of the state that would help the small homeowner or the small renter? And it seems to me that if we had a few staff people in Takoma Park that could spend their time working on trying to wrangle more money out of the state by working with coalitions of other communities, the payoff might be a lot bigger than trying to get 2 or 3 more people $10,000 for a home equity, for a home loan or something like that. Anyway, I think it's an emergency. It's going to affect some of our wards in a really big way. And, you know, if our state can talk about putting $2 billion into trying to help Amazon build their second headquarters in Montgomery County or something, we ought to be able to come up with a little money for the impact on the Purple Line.
Thank you, Mr. Sherwood. All right, I think we are at 5 minutes to 9. If, okay, you get the last question, please.
I'm not really sure what I want to say, but I feel like I may represent a constituency, you know, that hasn't yet spoken. I'm not certain about that, but I live in one of the mixed income high rises, the affordable housing high rises, and we have some concerns about how the city has worked with those owners in providing incentives to them, but not ensuring that the renters are well taken care of. Also, your report, I did a cursory look through the report earlier today and the draft strategic plan, but you mentioned, no, wait a minute, sorry. Mixed income. We already have mixed income in, well, at least in my building, and I'm certain that's the case in the other 8 large multi-unit housing buildings that are here. I am in favor, very much in favor of the ADUs, because I do think that that's and I know that's a challenge for us, but I do think that that's a benefit to seniors or people who want to stay in place. It could also be a benefit to people who are looking to move out of the large apartment buildings. And I would like to see more or some effort on that part. Once upon a time, a long time ago in New York City, I was a real estate paralegal, and I worked on co-op and condo conversions. There's a benefit for that, but here, without new construction, you are going to lose, you know, your housing stock, your rental housing stock and the affordable housing stock. I really like the idea, Kate, or Mayor Kate, I really like the idea of taking a pause and making sure that we understand what's here, what do we have here, what's the older stock, what's about to expire from any tax abatements or exemptions that somebody got in a pilot or whatever other program. And I think that should really be a driver. Secondly, we already know, as Wayne said, we already know, the Washington Post has been reporting on this for a long time, the displacement of people around metro stations. When they put that purple line through here, all the people who live around there are all going to be displaced. And we have to give some thought to how we can incentivize developers to care. It can't all be about greed. I do have some friends who own apartment buildings, and they are very much involved in sustainable communities, and that's what we need to focus on as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, well, we are approaching 9 o'clock. I'm sure we will be continuing this conversation. Again, if you did not get a chance to ask your question, there are cards over by the door over here. You can write out a question there. There will be another online comment form on the city's website where people can also provide questions. And as you know, you can also contact any one of us here at any time. In upcoming weeks, on March 14th, we will be having a work session with the Renters Protection Group here, and then another work session on this item on March 21st. So we will be continuing to discuss this draft report. I want to thank I'm going to say Marjorie and Bill, because I said your last name once, for this. And I'm sure some of us up here have more questions that we'll be sending you to discuss. And I think one of the things that was helpful to me tonight is, as you were going through this, to also talk about the effort it would take to put something in and the impact it would have as we're talking about housing. And so some more of that feedback I think would be very helpful as the City Council continues to discuss this. So thank you very much for coming this evening. Come back Wednesday night. We'll be back here again. Did I forget something? Oh, yes, right. On Wednesday night, the meeting is in the Azalea Room, not here, and we will be discussing the City Council's priorities with the department heads, the city staff. It is open to the public, so please come to the meeting.
And last minute pitch for the putting any comments you might have or questions you have online. On the bottom of the agenda, as well as on the screen, is a shortened version of the website. So if you go to that, it'll link you to the comment page.
Ms. Daines, what is the, can I just ask, what is the time limit for providing comments?
Every time we establish one, it gets extended. So right now there is no deadline.
Keep them coming.
Keep them coming.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.